Is Tilray a good investment? In order to understand their financials and their likely future, you should understand the strength of their brands. Like Good Supply, who was among the first to offer a reasonably priced product that actually burned cleanly. But otherwise it was dry and crispy and lacking in aroma. But their low price in an uncompetitive environment gave them a certain amount of popularity. In fact, 3 or 4 years ago, if you were to ask a bud tender what their best-selling brands were, there was a good chance they'd mention Good Supply. These days, in a much more competitive market, they are much less likely to do so. They also have a brand called Riff, which is only marginally better, but they try to sell it for significantly more, and it appears as though their efforts are unsuccessful. They also have a brand called Canica, which is priced somewhere in between the 2 previously mentioned brands. They're also of low quality, and enough said about them. It's important to note that I haven't tried any of these brands in quite some time, and for the purposes of this video, I did not try any of these 3 brands again. But many growers have improved significantly over the last few years, and I did need to try at least one of their brands. So I tried their supposedly best one, Broken Coast. I tried them a few times a few years ago, and my most significant impression of them was that they did not burn cleanly, meaning they are overfed in the growing process. When I tried them this time, my first impression was that they looked very good. It was large, dense, and crystally. However, it didn't have much of an aroma to it. And though it seemed to burn better than what I recall from years ago, it still didn't burn all that well. And it had a bit of an unclean taste to it, which indicates to me that they got their nice appearance based on overfeeding it rather than giving it ideal lighting. So none of that is good, especially when you consider the price I paid of $60. You can get many products which I consider to be far better at about $40. So if I didn't like this brand, why would I buy a quarter and not an eighth just to try it out for the purpose of this video? Because I couldn't find an eighth. I went to 2 stores which had no Broken Coast flour, and the third only had a quarter. I asked the clerk how well it sells, and he said it, quote, usually ends up as old inventory. And I think that sums up Tilray's brands fairly well. They did acquire Hexo recently, but their brands such as Up 20 and OS are cheap and not very good. ReadyCan, which Hexo acquired about 2 years ago, did have some popularity a while ago for being cheap and not too terrible, but we'll see how well that's held up when we review their financials. In Tilray's last quarter, they reported negative margin. In fairness, that's not usual for them, and in the same quarter last year, they reported 26% gross margin. However, when you subtract operating expenses, they lose at least $15 million, and more depending on how you count it. And when you come back to their most recent quarter, their net revenue dropped a few percent versus last year's quarter. While it's true that they may find some operational efficiencies as they merge with Hexo, and possibly improve the expense side of their earnings report, when you look at Hexo's last report, you see that they had negative margin. And that's not unusual for them. And their net revenue more than halved versus last year's quarter, so that's not a very good sign. And when you look at their balance sheet, they may have some cash, but they have more debt. And given their performance, they may need to sell debt and even dilute on a somewhat regular basis, possibly until they can't do it anymore. In fact, they did just sell a bunch of convertible debt through their Tilray brand, and they diluted through their Hexo brand. So you may not find many headlines about Tilray diluting earlier this month, but they did. If you are interested in companies in this sector who are making money selling popular products, you should like this video and subscribe to this channel because that is its main focus.